So this is Jeff Corder, and I'm creating a video for a discussion group that we're having tonight on the topic of faith, doubt, early Christian beliefs and creeds, and how that has influenced where we are today. And I wanted to start by just saying that this was created as a result of our sermon last Sunday, talking about doubting Thomas and his demand for evidence to see where Jesus actually had holes in his hands and side. And so the role of science and faith and doubt and belief, and this is going to be part of a larger discussion group. One of the things I talked about in my sermon was the Apostles' Creed and how it came to be. And I wanted to break that down just a little bit more before our discussion tonight. So we're actually going to use this video as a bit of a kickoff for the discussion. I want to talk a little bit about the early church history and just how it has come about. So I wrote a timeline and I wanted to share that with you. I'm not sure how well this will come out. Due to using YouTube, the technology is a little limited on my end. I don't know how to share a PDF file, but I want to have everybody look at the time frame from when Jesus was alive and the period before his death and resurrection to the year 325. We see that right after the Lord had appeared to the disciples, we have the apostles' mission. This is recorded mostly in the Acts of the Apostles, but before the Acts of the Apostles was written, you had stories that were handed down from community to community as the apostles went around spreading the news of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. In about 50 AD, the apostle Paul starts a mission himself to the Gentiles, which are buried in his letters. Most of the letters of the New Testament are written by the apostle Paul. But around that time, also you have probably the letter of James and perhaps the letter to the Hebrews, which right now nobody really knows who wrote, but it was probably written sometime in that time frame. According to church tradition, in 64 AD, when Rome was burnt, it was blamed on Christians. And so Nero killed a lot of Christians, including Peter and Paul. And so after the death of two of the pillars of the church, there was a concentration on the apostolic message, the message of the apostles as they were dying out, to be honest. 70 AD, we see a huge cataclysmic event, the destruction of Jerusalem by the armies of Rome. Around that time, the Gospels, as we have them today, were probably written, recording some of the stories that were passed down from the apostolic teaching, as it was called at that time. So, along with the letters of Paul, we had the Gospels of John, Mark, Luke, Matthew, letters from John, and Peter that were beginning to enter the church teaching of the time. So we have the focus on the real testimony of the apostles. And so this apostolic teaching was being concentrating in these communities of Christians. Around 100 AD, we have the beginnings of what we could call a canon, which focused on those Gospels, and the rule of faith was becoming an issue, a teaching of what those Gospels meant as far as theologically. Around this time as well, there was a brand of Christianity called Gnosticism, which was beginning to take shape with some other Gospels which were written at that time. Gospel of Peter, Gospel of Mary Magdalene, perhaps the Gospel of Thomas was written at that time frame as well. And so the rule of faith became very important in determining which Gospels were considered orthodox, as the term was becoming, and which were not. About 20, 30 years later, this became standardized in creedal forms, especially used around baptisms. And the Roman Creed, or the Old Roman Standard, was the earliest version of the Apostle Creed. This would be something that people would learn before they were baptized, and a bishop would ask, do you believe in God? And they would say, I believe in God the Father. Do you believe in Jesus? I believe in Jesus Christ, his Son, my Lord. And so these statements became part of a creed which was used more and more by the church. So by 200, we had an early version of the Apostles' Creed. It left out some parts of our modern Apostles' Creed, but largely said many of the things that are in there today. And around that same time frame, we had more or less agreement of which books were considered orthodox by the early Christian church, handed on by some apostolic tradition and agreed upon by most bishops at that time. So we see that the Council of Nicaea actually has a creed in place before the Nicene Creed came about in 325 AD. I just wanted to go through that. That doesn't necessarily prove that they got everything historically correct or that there were no changes. And I think it's interesting to me that the theology in the creed may have had an impact on what got into the New Testament and what got left out. So this rule of faith and these creeds, and there are other earlier creeds that we see in some of the New Testament, in Ephesians chapter 4 and Philippians chapter 2, in 1 Timothy verse 3:16. There are early creeds that were used even during the Apostle Paul's time that were being shared through Christian communities of the time. So I just wanted to give you a timeline, and we'll talk a little bit about books and creeds and belief and how they came to be. Again, that doesn't address all the concerns of people who would say that stuff got changed or left out, nor does it prove conclusively this is absolutely true, but it is in history, and I look forward to discussing it this evening on our Zoom call. Blessings to everybody. Bye-bye.